So I spent, so 8 years ago, I started at Anoka County as the Affirmative Action Officer. And in that role, I had to relearn how to work with white people. Because as a diversity trainer, I taught high school. I was involved in a number of diversity initiatives kind of growing up. Some of the initiatives you might have heard of, like the ADL, A World of Difference program in the 80s, the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond kind of in the 90s. Did some stuff around Joseph Brandt's Dismantling Racism training, did some of the Peggy McIntosh kinds of stuff. Jane Elliott, has anyone ever heard of Jane Elliott? Brown eyes, blue eyes, kind of stuff. A lot of folks are drawing blanks when I give these names, but feel free to research them. And so I came to Anoka County with a special and unique way of looking at and thinking about diversity. And what I realized was that what I had been taught was ineffective for the kind of work that I needed to do in Anoka County. So I don't know if you guys know, kind of the demographics of Anoka County, but Anoka County is pretty much white. Yeah. So and no apologies to be made about that. So it's not a problem. It is just a fact of, it's a point of information. And so what I had to do was I had to figure out, how do I talk specifically with large groups of white people about diversity and inclusion in a way that doesn't separate, segment, or piss them off, to be quite frank, right? And so a number of the things that we'll talk about today are things that I learned in that process, and are also things that I learned from my high school students. I taught high school at a charter school in St. Paul named Skills for Tomorrow. It was like on the corner of University and Fairview, if you know that part of town, Frogtown, kind of Midway Frogtown area. And so my students taught me a lot about what it means, A, to be a teacher, to be a helper, and to be a learner. I think I learned a lot more from them than I probably ever taught them. And so I'm going to share some of that stuff with you today as well. So I certainly have an agenda. I have a PowerPoint that I can pull up. I have some notes. I have handouts. There are certainly things that I would like to talk about. But I'm also interested in the things that you would like to talk about. So what are some of the things that are either burning questions for you, comments that you've heard from folks, or concepts that you'd like to explore, given this particular topic around diversity and inclusion today? I know that the news has sparked some conversations around marriage equity with the Grammys having their ceremony. There's some conversations about football players and how they articulate themselves versus how other people articulate themselves. So if there are any burning issues, I certainly wanted to address any of your questions or concerns.
Well, I have one.
Yeah,
my son was in 3rd grade, and we were in a very white neighborhood on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. And the state decided that we needed more inclusion in this white school. So what they did is they bused inner city black kids to this school, and a lot of problems ensued. And I was upset about it because I felt horrible for these kids. They weren't being included. It was like they. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying.
And their parents, they couldn't come to conferences and be a part of the school, and I don't know, and I've seen that with people with disabilities as well. They want to include children with disabilities in the lunchroom, and yet I've worked with people with disabilities, and you go into the lunchroom and they're not being included, they're sitting alone at a table. So I don't understand that fine line and what we can do about that.
Okay, about which part of that?
Both. It's well, okay, let's just stick to the school, I'm sorry. Just to the school. How do we do that inclusion right?
Okay. So I can give you a really good answer, but you will not like it. But I'm going to give it to you anyway.
Okay.
All right. So, I want to get some other questions. Other questions or thoughts? Yes.
Could you just speak a little bit to whether you think it's helpful to have training in grade school, junior high, high school, a class much like this one?
Okay. So
When
training.
And when should that start? What's your opinion on when that starts? I know the home, the parents are the first teachers, I get all that, but beyond that.
I'm not sure that there's much beyond that. When do you get acclimated to a society? When does that happen?
Before the age of 6, according to
Yeah, Adler says before 5, right?
Yeah, right around 3, right? Did you know at 3 years old they give kids, particularly in urban areas, reading tests, and based on those reading tests, they decide how many prisons they're going to build.
No.
Yeah, I believe that.
Who's they?
Who do you think they is?
Well, I'm wondering, is it which administration or who, is it the school systems? Is it the government? That's what I mean by they.
Is there a difference?
Maybe.
Is there a difference between the school system and the government? School system is the government.
Okay. Just wondering, are they doing this overtly or covertly? I mean,
Do you know about it?
no.
Okay.
So,
You should be a lawyer.
yeah.
You should be a lawyer.
No, I don't have enough. Yeah, I don't have enough self-control to be a lawyer.
You should be a lawyer.
Yeah, I feel like. So, yeah, that's why I'm a teacher, right?
That's why I'm not a teacher.
Oh, that's why you're not a teacher. Yes.
The reason I asked this question is I read an editorial about, in the Wall Street Journal, about the campus at Stanford and how in the humanities they have thrown out some of the long-term teachings about Shakespeare and some of the classics and replaced it with multicultural teaching. So it just sparked some thoughts in me about, well, what would happen if that happened much earlier. It seems to me like if you're waiting until someone's in college
Yep.
and you're,
So,
it's kind of
so
a
part of your
late.
question actually is trying to identify pedagogy, right? So, would I give a third grader calculus?
If they're ready for it.
How many third graders do you know are ready for calculus?
There probably is one out there.
Now, how many do you know that are ready for calculus? None.
Generally not.
Right? So I don't know personally any that are ready for calculus, so I'm not going to give a third grader calculus. So when you ask that question, when should we start? Well, it depends on what are you talking about in terms of starting and what it is that we're supposed to be teaching. What I do know is that the family units, and this is really funny because good liberal people will say this, that I believe in diversity and I think diversity is important, but none of their friends are diverse.
Right.
They don't do diverse things. They don't hang around people that don't look or act or think like they do. So what do their children get? What they're teaching them. So, do we teach diversity training in kindergarten? I would say no. We teach the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. If they can master that, then that goes throughout the rest of their lives. So we don't need diversity training if people can master that. The problem is people can't master that because they get in the way. So I teach at Bethel as well. And, we had this conversation about communism versus socialism versus capitalism versus the concept of democracy. And I simply said all of those are great systems. They're great systems until you add people. You add people and it messes it all up, right? So when we talk about that golden rule, when we talk about teaching kids stuff, we also have to be mindful of how we talk about things, right? So what are the classics? Who's established what a classic is? Is classic? Is it Swahili? Is classic? Is it Arabic? Is that a classic? Well, if you ask someone from Nairobi, that would be a classic. So we have to be real mindful of what we present as acceptable and normal. And then when the tune changes, we have to be conscious of measuring what that change is versus what we think it should be. Right? Julie, just to answer your question, the busing stuff, I was one of those kids on a bus going from one side of town to the other. Right? They took all of our neighborhood and put us on a bus, and we went to the east side, and we're all hanging out on the east side in neighborhoods where they didn't want us, and we still participated in all sorts of stuff. What's the solution? The solution is giving tax breaks for integrated neighborhoods. Give it a tax break. You have an integrated neighborhood and it has these kinds of demographics, we're going to give everybody in there a 10-year tax break in this percentage, blah, 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 blah. I certainly would do that. But what do we do in a capitalist society? We're not doing that. We do the opposite of that, right? We create communities in a way that aren't sustainable, particularly for the goals of diversity. So, for example, Eden Prairie, not picking on Eden Prairie, but they passed a city ordinance that a house built in that in the city of Eden Prairie has to have certain dimensions. So, if your house isn't 2,500 square feet, if it's smaller than that, you can't build that in that community. So, what does that do?
It excludes a lot of people.
It excludes a lot of people, but it makes a neighborhood sustainable. The property values are stable, which is great if you can be a part of that. Buying that stock while it's low. So we'll talk about that. We'll also let me put this over here too. The 8th day principle. All right. Any other things people want to talk about? Wow. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the whole idea of this controversy about boys who are kind of falling behind in school, and that there's more women going to college, and there's an ongoing debate of what's going on with that and the impact of that, and kind of a subset of that is the idea that we see a lot of initiatives to get women into the STEM fields. But there really isn't anything out there that says men need to be therapists, or they need to be teachers, or they need to be social workers or nurses. So I guess the options for women are focused on opening them up, but yet the options for men, the society, both men and women, don't seem to be moving in a direction for that. So how that influences curriculum and pedagogy again, that starts to leave certain cultures out. I mean, is there a culture of men? Is there a culture of women, or girls and boys?
And what I'll give you, and you and I are going to have more conversations because there's a lot more to your questions than what we'll be able to deal with here.
Sure.
A mediocre man or boy will have more opportunities being mediocre than an excellent woman.
Okay.
When we talk about price, we talk about pay equity. So again, I worked at Anoka County, and we have because we receive federal funds and we operate with federal funds, one of the things that we had to do was make an account of our pay equity. And pay equity basically is, are men and women getting paid the same? Now, the thing about pay equity is that there is a percentage that you can, there's a threshold that you can have inequity. There's an inequity threshold. So men can make more than women in this certain percentile. But if you go beyond that, then you got a big problem. And guess what? What was a practice, or what is often a practice, particularly in government institutions? What do?
They ride that.
They ride that threshold, right? Because we don't want to do more than we have to do. And if we don't get caught for it, then why should we do more? Now, I will tell you that government institutions are not, or private institutions are not insulated from that same kind of practice. So, so oftentimes we can have, and the system's really designed because men kind of set this stuff up, that you can be mediocre and still get all the accolades that people who have to work just as hard don't necessarily get.